unfortunately, in Norway, is like the Jewish kindergarten is the most protected building in the whole country. So they have the kids there, like the 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. What they meet is machine guns every morning, 24/7, 365 a year, police with machine guns. They're standing there all the time. And this has become normalized because that's what you need to have if you're going to have a Jewish kindergarten.
Something is changing across Europe. Open anti Semitism is rising again. Jewish schools are under armed protection. Jews across major cities are hiding symbols of their identity. And after recent attacks in the UK and growing unrest across Europe, many are asking, did October 7th unlock something that was already beneath the surface? My guest today is Henrik Beckheim, an Oslo based author, podcaster, and speaker focused on anti Semitism, media narratives, and the deeper societal shifts happening across the West. After October 7th, Henrik began speaking with Jews across Europe about fear, silence, and the normalization of anti Semitism disguised as activism. Today, we'll discuss what's happening inside Europe, why so many Jews feel abandoned, how anti Zionism became socially acceptable, and whether Europe is approaching a breaking point. Henrik, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Daniel. Happy to be with you.
So, Britain just raised its terror threat level after attacks targeting Jews. Anti-Semitic incidents are surging across Europe, and even mainstream leaders are suddenly calling this a crisis. Are we watching Europe cross a dangerous line right now that we haven't seen in a very long time?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're definitely crossing a line, and it's almost like that image that you see with the frogs being boiled alive, not knowing the water is getting warmer. And I think we're the frogs right now, and it's almost like we don't want it to be that way. So we're trying to almost rationalize it and saying like it couldn't be that bad, it couldn't possibly be that bad. And I'd always say that I think we've learned, I hope we've learned from 6 million dead Jews in the Holocaust, and we couldn't possibly have anti-Semitism after something like that. Like the Western world must have learned, Europe must have learned, the world must have learned from that. As it turns out, I guess we're doomed to making the same mistakes once again, and not necessarily in the same way and manner. You know, anti-Semitism always shows up in a new way, in a new camouflage, and it takes different turns. So I don't think we will see like the industrial genocide of Jews again, hopefully, but in a different manner, in a way that it's difficult for Jews to live their life. And I'd say here in Norway, where I live, I'd say you can exist as a Jew, but I don't think you could live as a Jew here.
Do you think that October 7th unlocked something there in Europe that was hiding beneath the surface? Or was it because of October 7th that this created the anti-Semitism?
I think it's both. I think it both unlocked something that was just beneath the surface and that I hoped really wasn't there. I didn't think we have such a anti-Semitic country that we actually have, but I think it was just beneath the surface. And a lot of people, it seems right now, are like feeling like, hey, it's safe to come out. It's safe to be anti-Semitic again now that the coast is clear almost. It's that kind of a feeling where people aren't shunned the way they used to be. You know, it used to be a stigma to be openly anti-Semitic, to be openly hating Jews. It used to be something that was actually frowned upon. That wasn't really a popular thing to do. But as turns out now, it doesn't really have consequences for people anymore to be like that. So we're seeing more and more of people's real attitudes. And I think that's like the only positive thing with it, that people are finally honest with their opinions. Now, of course, that doesn't go for all people. And we also have lots of support here in Norway, I'd say, from, of course, the Jewish community, but also from the Christian community, who I'm seeing turning out and really supporting the Jews and saying that almost like not in our names and standing up for Jewish life. So that's positive to see. But the rest of society, the secular society and the society at large in general it's like a lot of people are just sitting quiet in their boats, not saying anything, hoping that this will blow over and not really taking a stance, a moral stance on what's going on. And I think that's almost just as bad as being part of on the wrong side of things.
And what shocks you more? Is it that, you have these extremists in Europe, or how it's becoming normalized, that this hostility towards Jews is becoming normalized? Is there something that Is one shock you more than the other?
Yeah, I think both of them is like somehow it's like it's not surprising either that we have a lot of hostility towards Jews. It didn't surprise me, but it shocked me perhaps the level of it and also how common it is now and how acceptable it is now. Like I said earlier, like previously it used to have a lot of consequences and people would like turn against you and you would be socially shunned and you would be out of the good company of the social conversation and you wouldn't be included in the same way if you were openly anti-Semitic, whereas now it's like almost something you'd see daily and it's something like almost normalized. And it's also scary to see all the anti-Semitic attacks and the terrorist attacks and all the way to it's now dangerous to say that you're Jewish, to wear Jewish symbols, to wear a kippah, to wear a Star of David. That's like almost impossible to walk down the streets in Oslo, the capital of Norway, and wearing a kippah. You would be probably the police would advise you against doing that. You'd probably be attacked like 10 seconds. So it's I'd say is like it's if you look at history and if you only look at history from the Second World War until now, from the Holocaust, it's like I think I've started looking at it as we've had a period of unusually low anti-Semitism, I'd say, if you look at the big picture, because if you include hundreds of years and even thousands of years, you'd see that this is just a wave function, that this goes up and down in waves. And we've had an unusually low wave after Holocaust, and now it's like coming back up to normal levels again, unfortunately.
Yeah. I've heard from several people that believe that, as we know, the Muslim population has grown in Europe over the years, and it's at high levels now. And as we know as well, that Muslims are not the biggest fans of Jewish people, stemming back from the Quran. Do you think that most of this is coming from that? And do you think that politicians are afraid to speak up about it, to lose votes? Maybe get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a part of that because it's one of those difficult words for politician is Islamophobia. Nobody wants to be branded as a racist or Islamophobic, so that's a catch-22 for politicians, and they don't want to be seen taking the part of Israel or taking the side of Jews because then that would mean in this kind of black and white world that they're against Muslims. Like you can't be on both sides at the same time. It's almost like a football match. And I think that that's so unfortunate because, of course, you could include all kinds of people in your society politically for who you want to be with and who you want to be for. You don't have to take sides like that. And unfortunately, yeah, there like in Norway, we're only 1,500 Jews and there are lots and lots and lots more of Muslims. And if it comes down to it, I think that politicians are willing to throw us under the bus to get the Muslim votes in the general election. So it's almost like it's like a really simple mathematical equation to see what gains a politician here. And of course also the far left has this relationship with Islamists, of course, and Muslims, and I think they've found each other in this kind of horseshoe. Also with the far right now, also joining forces almost with the far left, as we see in the U.S. as well with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and all of these actors. So we're seeing the same thing in Norway as well, and I think it's scary to look at, and then it's unfortunate, and it's such a sad sight to see that people are what they are joining forces in, and where they're finding common ground is in their hatred for Jews.
You mentioned that Norway was ranked as one of the most anti-Zionist, anti-Israel countries in Europe. What does life look like there for Jews on a day-to-day basis? Maybe talk about the level of security they need and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was Ynet news outlet in Israel that defined Norway as the most anti-Israel country in Europe, and rightfully so, because I'd say that you can't really live fully as a Jew. You'd have to hide your identity in that case. You could live as a Jew, in between your four walls, almost with your blinds down to paint a picture of it. But you can't really walk outside with your kippah on, wear a Star of David, or have kids and go on the bus and have the kids say, yeah, we're going to the synagogue, or, you can't do that because that's a security risk. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And if you want to live here as a Jew, then you have to be in hiding. You have to not really reveal who you are. So it's not really a place I'd recommend for Jews to travel to in that sense. And I thought it was so freeing when I went to Israel, and just that contrast to be able to feel like you could be who you are, right? You could have your Star of David out. You can openly say you're Jewish. You can openly tell people that you're a Jew and that you just feel at home and you can be who you are. And that's like the starkest of all contrast, I'd say, is in Norway and probably other European countries as well. But it's really it's really something you'd feel here, unfortunately.
Now, you've said that October 7th awakened something Jewish inside you. What changed emotionally, and how connected did you feel to your Jewish identity before October 7th?
Yeah, I'm what they would call October 8th Jew that woke up after October 7th. And it's like, I've always known that I'm of Jewish heritage. My great grandmother was killed and she perished in the Holocaust. And they actually tried to flee from Vienna and Austria, and they fled up here to Norway because it was such a northern country, and they thought, Hitler and the Nazi Germany would never get this far, and they'd probably be safe up here. And of course, they weren't safe up here. And in fact, it was Norwegian police that arrested her. They didn't even need help from the Germans, from the Nazis. They did it themselves. They were more than happy to help. So they sent her on a boat, the DS Donau, it was called, down to Auschwitz, where she was killed in 1942. And the rest of my family, fortunately, they fled over to Sweden, our neighbor country, and they were rescued there and then came back to Norway. So that's the reason why I am in Norway at all. Just fortunate that at least some of my family was saved from the Holocaust. And that story has always been with me. My family history has always been with me, and it's always been a part of me, knowing that I'm Jewish, but I've never really cultivated it, never really lived it out, never really been religious or even taken part in the cultural side of things, unfortunately, and never really had a relationship to Israel in that sense, just living, kind of a normal Norwegian life, I'd say. But then October 7th happens, and it was so visceral, I felt like it was my family that was being killed and slaughtered down there in the kibbutz and in the Nova Festival area. All these kids, all these families. It really felt like it was my family, was my people being slaughtered. And I realized if I had been there at that time, it would have been me being slaughtered. And I just felt like was almost like this green button of just activate, it activated my Jewish heritage, my soul, my collective memory. And it made me just delve into this, into being Jewish, connecting with people. I just had this feeling I had to find my people, I had to get back with my people. And I joined in the Jewish community here. I've found new friends. I took part in the Jewish culture and started holding Shabbat and joining in on the holidays and just being part of Jewish life. And obviously also with my podcast, talking to a lot of Jews and trying to make sense of things, trying to understand, and really took a deep dive into what it means to be Jewish. And also, like, what is this anti-Semitism? Because I never understood, like, there's no rational reason for hating Jews. I don't understand. Why would you hate Jews? What has a Jew ever done to you? It's like, there's no rational reason if you look at it rationally. And that's when I started to understand, after talking to lots of people, rabbis and scientists and historians and all kinds of people, like, anti-Semitism doesn't lie at a rational level. It's at an irrational, deeper level. It's about something else, something intangible, something you can't really grasp and touch. And I found that fascinating and trying to delve into that at the same time as also learning about all the positive stuff, about Jewish culture and our heritage and our history and how we fought so many of these people who had tried to kill us, and learning how the Jews have been persecuted for such a long time, been slaughtered for such a long time, and nobody has ever been able to successfully kill us. And I understood that that must annoy the anti-Semites so much because we're just a people that just refuse to lay down and die. And I took so much inspiration from that as well. And also what kept me going after October 7th with all the hatred and so much darkness and so much anti-Semitism was just thinking about our hostages, our Israeli hostages, our Jewish hostages that was down there in the tunnels of Hamas. And I thought just if they can go for another day, if they can keep their hopes up, if they can be there and survive, then this is the least I could do, trying to use my voice and speak up and talk to people and try as best as I can, both learning and educating myself and at the same time using my voice trying to affect the society that I live in. And I've always felt, even before October 7th, that, you know, if there would ever come a time such as the one that my family faced in 1942 when my great grandmother was killed by the Nazis, then I would be the one to speak up and use my voice. You know, I've always promised myself that, and now I see that time coming. You know, October 7th came, and I found myself being held to that promise, and I had to fulfill that promise, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I couldn't do anything in 1942 when she was killed. Gisela was her name, but I'm here now in 2026, and I can use my voice now and do something now.
You know, some people would have the opposite reaction, would kind of try to hide their Jewishness and kind of try to push away what's happening in Israel and just keep going. But it seemed like you had the opposite effect. How did your friends and family react to you becoming more involved in this, your Jewishness, your identity? What was their reaction to you?
Yeah, first, I'd like to say that I think both are just as natural reactions. I can fully understand people who like go below the radar, go into hiding. They don't want to be killed. They don't want to be hurt. They don't want to be hunted. You know, I think that's a natural Jewish instinctual reaction to go into hiding because just look at our history, you know. It's understandable that people would do that, and I fully get it. Just that for me, it was like opposite. I just had to get out there and fight and do something and at least, you know, die trying almost, right? So yeah, my family and friends, unfortunately, I've lost a lot of friends because of this. And that's very disappointing, of course. People I've known for a long time, and it's almost like they fell for the media narratives, I think. I think it's so dominant, especially here in Norway. It's so one sided, it's so skewed towards anti Israel hate, and Israel being the bully, Israel being the bad guy, Israel being the oppressor, and the Palestinian people is the oppressed. And that's the only way you can see things through this like postmodernism lens of oppressed oppressor narrative, and that's the only way or the highway. And it's difficult to try to say that, hey, it's not necessarily like that, it might be the other way around sometimes. And then people are bombarded with what the media tells you, with what the leaders of the country tells you, and the politicians, and everyone is like on the same side. And also Norway is like a very conformist country. Norway has a nice culture. It's very egalitarian, very flat, very inclusive. It's a social democracy, so it has a lot of great values. But one of the cons is that it's very, very conformist culture. So that if we have a general opinion of what's correct, a consensus, if you will, then everybody has to be on board with that. And if you're not on board with the general consensus, then you're almost shunned, you're almost banned from society almost. So it's like you have to be on board. It's not like in countries or in Jewish culture where discussion is appreciated, having a difference of opinion is appreciated. It's almost like the opposite of that. So I think that's a lot of the reason why I lost a lot of friends, is that they cannot possibly see the perspective that I have and seeing what actually happened on October 7th. And I also feel like it's just disappointing also. It's like they just fall for this narrative and they just shun you. They just, I'd say, just leave you. And yeah, it's very disappointing. But I felt like I had to do this anyway, because if people are like that, then they aren't true friends anyhow. And a true friend would never do that. They would try to see your perspective, and they'd be your friend even if you have disagreements on politics or Middle East several thousands of kilometers away. But that's something very peculiar about this situation as well, that something that is like several thousands of kilometers away can actually split families. It can rupture relationships. It can destroy friendships. Such a away. And that's something very special and very unique, I think, to Israel being such a topic that has such effects on people so far away. You don't see that kind of effect on relationship of, let's say, situations in Sudan or in China or in conflicts or in civil wars, other places in the world. And God knows there are a lot of conflicts and civil wars and massacres and terrorism around the world, but it doesn't split families in the same way. While as the Israel-Palestine situation has the capacity to do that. And that's something very special, very, very unique dimension to this situation in particular, I think is perhaps proof of something special about this particular situation. And it was also difficult, I'd say, in my family as well. Some of my family is more like leaning towards like the Palestinian side of things and have decided upon like that is the correct narrative. And I'd say like almost like super left wing people probably in Israel also before this conflict. But even in Israel, I think that a lot of people who were on the outer far left and like the most peace loving people who thought that there could be peace, I think a lot of them also understood that at some point you have to realize what's the realities here. And Hamas that came in and over the borders and actually killed the most peace loving, most left wing people as well in the kibbutz, that people that had tried so hard to create peace between Palestinians and Israelis, even they were killed. So it's not about that at all. And I think I think a lot of people need a wake up call to what is like the realities on the ground and what is factual in this situation.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that this one issue is really blowing up people's relationships, and it doesn't make any sense. I had a guest on my show, Victor Davis Hanson, and he mentioned that this is what's happening with President Trump. He used to have Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, all these people, supporters of his, and they agree on every single issue, but there's one issue that they don't agree on, and it's Israel. And because of that, they have split up with him and they've left him. They don't support him anymore. I wanted to speak to you about what was life like in Norway before October 7th. You've shown, images of Jewish schools and kindergartens surrounded by barriers, armed security. How did that become normal? And at what point did that become normal?
Yeah, unfortunately, in Norway, it's like the Jewish kindergarten is the most protected building in the whole country. So they have the kids there, like the 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. What they meet is machine guns every morning, 24/7, 365 a year, police with machine guns. They're standing there all the time. And this has become normalized because that's what you need to have if you're going to have a Jewish kindergarten. And I think it's because of we had an incident in 2006 where an Islamist terrorist thought it'd be a good idea to bring a machine gun and spray the whole building with bullets. And after that, I think it was then that since then we've had police standing there guard 24/7 all the time because we know what happens if they don't. And but it's one thing is that terrorists are out there and we know that that could happen, but also it's something for the society at large to have this be normal and have this be acceptable, and this just be a situation where, hey, they're Jews, of course we need to have armed police officers standing there. That's because they're Jewish. And it's like it's also, I don't know, building up under the narrative that this is normal for Jews. So this is the way we want to live. This is just what it's like to have a Jewish existence. Then you need to have machine guns and protection to be able to live. And it's also dangerous to normalize that, I think, to become complacent and just accept that as a norm, as a way of life.
What does it do psychologically to the Jewish children that are growing up, with these concrete barriers, armed guards? Like, maybe you've had conversations. What do you think it does to them?
I think it does several things. I don't know, but it is me like thinking out loud here. But I think it does a few things. Like, first of all, normalizing that this is the way of Jewish life. This is the way you have to live. If you're going to be a Jew in Norway, you need to have machine gun police officers outside the Jewish kindergarten. That starts early, and that both gives you a fear, I'd think, to be in a place where there isn't machine gun police officers, like that would perhaps create a fear in you. Like, is it safe to go in here? There's no armed guards here. Can I go in here? And also it creates a feeling, I think, of like what are they going to ask their parents? Like, hey mom, why are there machine gun police officers outside? And if the parent is honest, of course, mom and dad can't say that. If they're really honest, they would say like, hey hun, because if they aren't there, then people want to come and kill you. Like, of course, they wouldn't say that, but that is the truth. And what kind of life is that? And what kind of existence is that? And of course, I'm also happy that the police and the authorities are prioritizing this, and it costs a lot of money using resources like this. Of course, I'm happy that they're doing that. But at the same time, just the fact that this has to be normal, that this is required to be able to live a Jewish life. It's horrendous, and we're in 2026. We're not in 1939 anymore. We're not in 1942 or 1944. We're not in Nazi Germany. We're in, like, per all standards, like one of the best countries in the world to live, at least on the paper. And at the same time, this is your existence. So I think that it's such a shame that we have to have that for Jewish people in 2026.
Do you feel like this is becoming the new norm? For example, in places like in London, do you see that the only way that the Jewish community can deal with this is just to heighten the security? The politicians are told, do something, we got to deal with this problem. But in reality, what can they do besides for beefing up the security?
Yeah, I feel like an analog to this would be like sitting in a boat that's taking in water, and you're sitting there with your little shovel and trying to shovel out the water as best as you can while the huge amounts of waters are just pouring in. You know the boat's going to sink, but you're trying your best. Like, it's almost like that. And it's, of course, I'm happy that they're doing it. Another red flag would be if the government is turning on us, not caring to protect us anymore, and saying like, this is costing too much resources, we can't like protect Jewish life, you gotta protect yourself. And that would be like another step down the ladder, of course, and probably a huge red flag for all Jewish societies across Europe, that you have to get out and get to Israel or someplace. But at least for now we have the police protection. I think that we need, at a political level, we need several things. We, of course, both need protection and armed guards and all of these things, but we also need to do something about society in general. And we need leaders that take a firm position that anti-Semitism has no place in Europe. It has no place in Norway. It has no place in a civilized society. And we have to do something about the communities that are actually the forerunners of anti-Semitism, that are actually building up underneath this. And what we're seeing here, like concretely, we having in one of our prominent universities, the NTNU up in Trondheim, there's a professor there who recently held a lecture calling October 7th, like, this is a quote from his lecture, saying that October 7th is the most beautiful thing we've seen in our century, end quote. That's what he said in the lecture. And do you think that the university director is calling that something horrendous, or saying that he doesn't agree with that? No, he's pointing to freedom of speech, saying that, I can't tell our professors what to say. He has freedom of speech. I can't even comment. And when a journalist press him to say like, but do you condemn that kind of speech? Do you react to that? Do you share that? He won't even comment, because that's not his place to say something to the contrary. So he won't comment on that, nor will he condemn it. So it's like, when we have leaders in our society and we have universities where professors are allowed to say that October 7th is the most beautiful thing in our century, and we have political leaders who are more concerned with being friends with Iran, and they're more concerned with the Palestinian cause, and they're more concerned with the far left, and we have demonstrators in our streets all the time. We recently had demonstration, not a demonstration, like we had in front of Parliament. We were there celebrating Israel 78, and we had speeches and balloons and Israeli flags, and then we had this angry mob of pro-Palestinians shouting that Zionists are terrorists and death, death to the IDF and Viva la Intifada, calling on Intifada, which we all know is the same as calling on massacres on Jews. That's what they wanted. And then we have politicians in the media and in the newspaper and in the political and public dialogue afterwards saying that, hey, we have freedom of speech, nothing we can say here. That's all right. They're just expressing their political opinions. There's nothing we can do about that. And, we don't have any leaders here that are taking a moral stance on what's okay. All we have are people who are just hiding behind freedom of speech. Fine, freedom of speech is an important value in our society, but it's not the only value. Fortunately, we have other values, such as protecting life and seeing life and human beings as something worth preserving and not glorifying October 7th, not calling on death of Jews and pogroms and saying Viva la Intifada. I feel like everybody's just hiding behind this freedom of speech and using it as cover, as a shield for actually having to take a moral stance on things, and just saying that we have freedom of speech, so there's nothing we can do. I don't think that's enough. I think we need to have leaders who can actually show they have a moral compass and try to take Europe and Norway, in our case, on the right path. And I think a lot would help if we had leaders who did that, and we had people in, not just political leaders, but also, as mentioned, leaders of universities and, you'd say the cultural elite, people in the media, people using their voices, people writing op-eds, people who are in the public discourse, taking a moral stance on things. That's what we need, in addition, of course, to, protection and armed guards for Jewish life.
Now, from what I heard, you have countries like Germany that are a lot tougher on this free speech, and I've seen videos of police dealing with the protesters there. What are they doing differently over there? Why can't it be replicated in other countries?
I think that in Germany, it's a special case because they really, really know what anti-Semitism leads to, and they don't want anything to do with that. They're really allergic to anti-Semitism and anti-Jewishness and anti-Israel sentiment. So they have a really special case, and I'm glad they do, so that they don't repeat anything from the 20th century over there. So I think we should look to Germany and see what they're doing, because we should really be tough on this. I don't think, freedom of speech is not a green card to stay, to walk out in the street and calling for terrorism and glorifying slaughter of Jewish people. You can't really just say that that is freedom of speech. You need to have a different political stance on this. And what kind of speech do we want in our streets? What kind of demonstrators do we want in our streets? Do we want terrorist thugs who glorify terrorism and trying to radicalize people and these kinds of movements? Fine, people can have a political opinion, but you need to draw a line somewhere. And especially when you see that these movements are building, and they're building up hate, and they're building up radicalization, and they're dangerous to society. And I think that Germany is one of the countries that really recognizes that, and seeing that, hey, we can't let this grow. We can't let this stuff grow in our society, because we know what that leads to. And they are acutely aware of what happens if you just let that go unchecked.
Now, a lot of people say that being anti-Zionist doesn't mean you're Semite, but it usually leads to that. Do you think that anti-Zionism is now becoming the socially acceptable version of being an anti-Semite?
Yeah, I think that the whole anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism thing is like when I had Hillel Neuer on my podcast in the studio, and he called it a distinction without a difference. It's like just two different words for saying the same thing, basically, and it's just camouflage, I think. It's slightly more difficult for people to say that they're openly against Jews. But of course, they're doing that as well now. In Norway, we had Haviv Retigur, the Israeli journalist, here in Norway last summer. And of course, he was going to hold a lecture. And on the way there, we had pro-Palestinian activists shouting Jews in our streets, like a direct quote. They didn't even care to hide behind anti-Zionism. They didn't care to hide behind saying no Zionists in our street. They were just honest and saying no Jews in our streets. And I think there's something positive there. Like finally, they just dropped the camouflage. They just dropped the whole mask. They just dropped the whole charades of pretending it be anything different than what it is. And I think it's just anti-Jewish. As I mentioned, I think anti-Semitism comes in different forms. Previously it was because of religion and a Christian kind of persecution of Jews, and then it was because of our race and blood and the whole eugenics and the whole Nazi Germany thing. And then in our lifetime, it's about Zionism now. It's just the same kind of thing, just shifting across the centuries to whatever can adapt to the time and age that you're living in.
You've mentioned something powerful. You said that empathy without truth becomes manipulation. What did you mean by that?
I think a clear example of that is how the pro-Palestinian movement, in lots of cases, are manipulating people's empathy. In the case, if you're seeing images of children who's been killed, of course, it's natural to feel empathy. We all feel empathy with that. I feel empathy with that. We all empathize with Palestinian kids who've been killed. But if somebody uses that instrumentally and manipulates you with that, then they're just using your empathy against you. And especially if the images are fake, if they're using AI, or if it's staged with makeup and like a Hollywood scene, or if it's even actually a Palestinian kid that's been killed. But why is it that people are so prone to jump from A to B and conclude that this is because of Israel or because of Jews? Might it be that Hamas used people as human shields and had an interest in seeing Palestinian kids killed because they knew that that would lead Western people who are probably good at heart. A lot of them, they're seeing kids dead and they wanted to stop. And all the media outlets, all the sources saying that this is Israel's fault. So they blame Israel. But might it be another player in between there who actually wanted these kids to die and who are preying upon your empathy, using it, weaponizing your empathy in the direction that they want? They want to see you demonize Israel, and that's why they're willing to sacrifice their own population to actually kill children, put them in the line of fire, in the crossfire, and then on purpose have them be killed because they'd like to prey on your empathy and using your empathy as a weapon in the media war, in the narrative war, in their quest for you to demonize Israel actually being a part in their play. And in that sense, the empathy is real, but it's misplaced and it's been manipulated. It's been manipulated by Hamas, especially, and Iran, and all of these countries who are seeing that because it's so easy to use good people who are meaning well, but they're uninformed and they don't have the whole picture. And they probably don't know they're being used. If we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, a lot of people, I think, on the side of like the pro-Palestinians probably have a good intention and they have empathy, but they don't have the full picture. They don't know they're being used. And that's why I say that empathy can be used as a tool of manipulation.
Do you think that social media has trained people to react emotionally before, thinking critically? How much of the problems we're seeing now is caused by social media?
Definitely. I think the algorithms are hyper trained to just react to our reactions, and engagement is what's important, and having the attention span of humans now, I think, is like a less than a second. If you go watch kids who are on TikTok and Instagram, scrolling through, they're probably looking at it, I don't know, like less than a second. So you need attention, and what's the best way to get people's attention, using and appealing to people's emotions and instinctual responses, I think. And some of the most instinctual responses, I'd say, is like kids. And what's kids who've been killed and murdered, kids and families and babies, preying on people's emotions like that. We know that a lot of bad actors are in that game because they like to split and divide, divide and conquer, as they say, is like the oldest trick in the book for winning a war. And we know that a lot of foreign intelligence is in that game. For example, China and Iran and different countries have an interest in dividing and conquering the Western world and Europe. And the way they can do that is just taking conflicts that are already there and then boosting them up like 1000x. And one of the biggest ones is, of course, Israel Palestine. And if they can get in there and boosting that, polarizing that, bringing even more bad actors and bots and AI, everything to just increase that hundredfold, thousandfold, then they can achieve their goals of splitting up a country, splitting families, splitting relationships, dividing and conquering. Because a house that is divided amongst itself is like that's a lot weaker, and that's a easier enemy for a foreign intelligence service.
Yeah. Last night I was watching a clip of Douglas Murray, and he was being told that the Jewish people love you. You're like a superhero for us. And how does that make you feel? And he said, I have different feelings, but one of the feelings is that I'm sad. Why? Because the fact that you're showing me so much love shows that there are not so many people out there that speak about the Jews and Israel positively. Most people are speaking negatively, and the fact that I do it positively, you guys love me so much, but it saddens me that more people don't speak out for Israel. Why do you think that most journalists feel uncomfortable showing the moral clarity after October 7th and like Douglas Murray?
I think that there's tremendous social pressure, tremendous social consequences. Like speaking from here in Norway, where I live, if you were to be a journalist here, where most journalists are left leaning, statistics show, if you were to come out and say that you're actually more on the side of Israel on these things, then you would be like socially shunned. You'd probably lose your job, probably lose your friends, probably lose your career, probably be out in the cold, frozen out from the good company. So there's tremendous pressure, tremendous social consequences, and people are too afraid. People are too afraid to stand up. I think that if a lot more people would have done it, then perhaps the consequences would be fewer as well, because a lot more people would actually just say what they meant. And I think that unfortunately we have a large silent majority that is actually there either on the fence on these things or actually more on the Israel side of things and actually with the Jews, but they're afraid, they're afraid of the social consequences. They're afraid of their neighbors, afraid of their families, afraid of their friends, afraid of their colleagues, and what would people think? What would people say? And I think a lot of this is rooted in not being brave, not standing up for what you believe in, not speaking truth to power, not standing up when the situation demands of you moral clarity. And I think a lot of people fail there. And I think a lot of people actually is ashamed of themselves for not doing that. They know they're doing wrong. They know they should be more brave. They know they should say what they mean, but they fold to their own fear, I think.
One of the arguments that you've made is that parts of the far left don't even recognize their own anti Semitism.
Mhm.
How can people genuinely believe that they're fighting for justice while spreading hatred at the same time?
I think it's because anti-Semitism is it's like a tip of an iceberg. It's like a little part of it is conscious, but as a huge part of it is subconscious. It's deeply unconscious. It's more of a mechanism of why things happen the way they do and why things unfold the way they do, rather than something you're conscious of. I don't think a lot of people actually walk around consciously thinking, I just hate those damn Jews. You probably some people do that too, but I don't think most people do that. I think a lot of people who are acting out anti-Semitic mechanisms don't even believe they're anti-Semitic. They think they're good people and they don't know what they're doing. They don't see it themselves because it's so deep. The mechanisms are so deep. And if you don't know anything about anti-Semitism, you would think it's just like being like throwing out racial slurs, like saying like, look at that stupid Jew, or I hate Jews, and then defining that as anti-Semitism, whereas it's not really that. It's so much deeper. It's like the mechanisms of society. It's like, why would you tend to believe things about Jews that you would never believe about any other people? that you would never believe about any other group of ethnicities. Why are you more prone to believe that Jews kill children? Why are you more prone to believe that they are conspiring behind the scenes and dragging the United States, the most powerful country in the world? Little Israel is dragging United States into a war because they're conniving, they're conspiring behind the scenes. These mechanisms, they're so deep. I think they're almost ingrained in our Western history, almost like archetypes, and you don't know them. You're not aware of them. They're below your level of consciousness. They're just in there in our society, in the undercurrents of our society. You don't know they're there unless they're being pointed out to you. And I think a lot of this is subconscious that way, that you don't even know why you're more prone to believe this stuff about Jews. It's just there. And if you're a person that's awake, that's actually able to reflect and look at these patterns and actually recognizing it in yourself, I think you'd be surprised. Like, hey, why did I think that about Jews? Why wouldn't I think that about like other people, about other ethnicities? I would never say such things about other people. Yet I jump to conclusions when it comes to Jews. Why do I do that? And I think that is anti-Semitism. And that's why it's also so difficult to fight, because first you also have to make people believe it's there. You have to make people understand that it's at a subconscious level, at something intangible, something they can't even grasp unless they're being told what it is. So it's almost like an enemy that's invisible that you have to fight. That makes it so much more difficult.
Do you think that non Jews in Europe fully understand how isolated many Jews feel right now? And what do you wish they understood about what life is like for Jews in Europe?
I wish they understood. I think a lot of people do understand, but I think it's important for Jews, like in the United States and different places, to see that this has different effects in different areas. I think it takes different forms in different areas. And I think it's important to see the signs, even if you're not living it for yourself. Perhaps you live in a community where things are pretty good, things are pretty stable, and life is nice, and the government is nice, and you're lucky and it's good, and I'm glad you have it that way. But it's important to see the signs in other communities, in other countries, in other parts of the world, and that they might not be synchronized. It doesn't happen at the same place at the same time everywhere. So it's important to pay attention. And of course, as Jews, or a lot of us, we're hyper aware of these signs. So that's also difficult, I think, to calibrate. What is it in me that is just a hyper aware, hyper vigilant Jewish instincts that is just telling me to get out now while you still can before you're dead? Like, which part of me is that, and which part of me is rational and looking at the evidence and calming down and saying, take a chill pill and things are going to be fine, things are going to blow over? And where do I find the balance between those two? How am I supposed to find the balance? Which one do I listen to? And of course, you have to listen to both. You can't be in full panic mode all the time, because you can't function, you can't live like that. But at the same time, you can't really shut off the alarm either, because it's there to save you. It's there because this has happened before, and it's probably going to happen again. And unfortunately, I think that I've come to the conclusion that you can never really cure anti-Semitism. You can't cure Jew hatred. It's almost something that's built into the cosmos of this universe. You can't cure it. All you can do is keep it in check. You keep fighting it, keep the dragon as small as possible, keep fighting it, keeping it in check, making this world a place where you can live. But I don't think you can get your hopes of curing the disease. It's almost like a chronic disease that the doctor just tells you, like, hey, you got this stuff, now you got to live with it, and here's some medicines, and I hope you'll be fine. And you have to just take your medicines and keep fighting it, and try your best, and that way being realistic about it, like not getting bogged down and becoming disappointed that you can never really cure this stuff, but rather trying to put in your efforts into seeing the patterns and trying to fight it as best as you can.
What gives you hope right now for the Jewish people at large, state of Israel, for our future?
What I see is really positive and really hopeful is the Jewish connection between people. Um, I'm so thankful that there are a lot more people like me, October 8th Jews, that are woken up and finding their people. And I think the Jewish people has never been stronger. The state of Israel has never been stronger. Just to think about that makes me so happy. Like if Jews in 1942 could have seen us now, like if my great grandmother could have seen us now, having the state of Israel, having the IDF, having such a huge defense force and having a country that has our backs and having each other's backs, like we're doing right now across the other side of the globe, talking together and trying to make sense of things and being connected and being friends. And how positive that is like, and I'm so proud to be in the 0.2% club, which is the Jewish population in the world. We're only 0.2%. And it's almost a compliment how much energy and focus all the anti-Semites give us and the world gives us, and how we're like at the forefront of things while at the same time just being such a small amount of people, and we take up a lot of space, and a lot of people hate us and a lot of people love us at the same time. But I think that's something about us Jews is like people have a love-hate relationship to us, but at least people care in some way or another. Either they hate us or they really, really love us. And I think that we're fortunate in this day and age to have each other and having each other's backs. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about being Jewish is that this verse to have each other's backs, and every Jew is responsible for each other. There are so many beautiful things in Judaism that we have to be proud of. How we have such a deep collective memory and history and things that bind us together, and knowing that no enemy of the Jews has ever been able to take us out, no matter who they are, if they're the Pharaoh or it's the Germans or what have you. Nobody's been able to take us out, and nobody will be able to take us out. It's just that we live in a time where we have to fight again. We were able to put down our weapons and put down our fighting stance for a little while after the Shoah, and now we're back at it again. We just have to fight, but we're not going anywhere. Israel's not going anywhere, and we're here to stay. And I think there's a lot of positivity and joy to be had from that, and being proud that we're Jewish. And in the face of it all, it doesn't matter if people hate us. I don't care. It's much more important with people who love us and that we love each other.
Exactly. Henrik, I want to thank you for your time, for your beautiful insights. How can people find you, listen to your amazing podcast? You had a lot of high level guests, and the floor is yours. Let us know.
Yeah, thank you. You can listen to me at both YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You could just find me, just search for Henrik Beckheim, which is Beckheim. And you can find me everywhere, also on Facebook and Instagram. And I try to have daily episodes as well. A lot of it speaking about Jewish life and also anti-Semitism, but also geopolitics and what's going on with the US and Iran and Israel and the Arab countries and all of that stuff there. And I try to like just follow my curiosity, and I always try to have a relationship with the guests that I have on my show to try to learn something from them. Like, regardless of our differences, there's something that I can learn from you. And I try to take my audience with me in that journey of learning and discussing and on the quest for more knowledge and more nuance and more truth. I think we need more truth and light in this world. And I try to play my part in that. So thank you also, Daniel, for having me on your show. And I'm so happy that you invited me. And thank you for the work that you're doing on your part. And thank you to your listeners who's been listening to this.
Thank you. Thank you. Wishing you all the best.
Likewise.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.